Thank you.
All right, now we're going to go north to the middle of the state of Vermont, over on Lake Burlington. Sara's going to take us there and present her thesis.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Alrighty. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out today. Before we begin, I just wanted to thank my committee members for supporting me throughout this entire process. So thank you to Professor Dupuy, Professor Simon, and Professor Eisenbach. And thank you to everyone who came out today to support me. And with that, this is Illuminating Happiness, developing a therapeutic co-housing community for those affected by S.A.D. So to begin the presentation, I will first propose the thesis question, introduce you to the design principles I established, then analyze the selected site, and then walk through the overall design. So while there are about 327 million people in the US right now, 10 million of those people are struggling with seasonal affective disorder. Now, S.A.D. is a type of major depression that comes and goes with the seasons, typically onset during the fall and the winter, going away during the spring and summer, only to cycle back through year after year. So not only are those suffering with S.A.D. Affected by these types of psychological and physical symptoms, they are also end up isolating themselves from everyone around them. So due to the circumstances of this disorder, it is heavily prevalent in the northern region of the US due to their longer winters and limited daylight hours, especially during the winter. It is also more prevalent in younger generations and in females. So the thesis question is, how can architectural design improve the mental and physical health of those suffering with S.A.D.? So by diving into my research, I first analyzed several different realms of psychology in order to understand how can architects influence the factors within their building in order to improve the well-being of those within them. So I studied environmental psychology, indoor environmental quality, and healing architecture. I then also studied how cultures can improve their well-being, especially in the Nordic region, in order to improve their lifestyles in a climate that's deprived of daylight, especially during those long, harsh winters. So then I asked the question, what residential building typology has the ability to improve the well-being of those suffering with S.A.D.? And that answer is cohousing. So cohousing is not only successful in creating stronger communities, but is also successful in that it applies a lot of large social spaces for those residents to engage in. So basically, co-housing means that the private living units are smaller, more efficient, and flexible in order to accommodate for larger communal spaces that are shared by all the residents. So that typically includes your dining, kitchen, and other living areas. So co-housing also employs social contact design guidelines. So these guidelines give architects guidelines as to where these public spaces occur, who has access to them, and how often they occur. So these guidelines are evident in some of the precedents that I studied. Not only that, but showing, okay, where do these social interactive spaces occur, how do they relate back to the private units, and then how daylighting strategies are influenced. So something to also note about these precedents is that almost all of them have an outdoor central courtyard space to act as an additional gathering space. So after synthesizing all of my research, I then developed 6 main design principles for an S.A.D. co-housing community. So the first being methods to maximize daylight, the second being having a clear organization and using central courtyard spaces, the third being having large public spaces for increased social interaction, the fourth connecting residents to nature, the fifth allowing for comfort and control within the building, and then the final design principle of utilizing natural materials and textures throughout. So then I extracted several main programmatic elements seen commonly in co-housing typologies. Then from there, extracting several programmatic activities then applying the design principles to those activities and seeing how they would influence them. So for example, almost all of these programmatic activities require these large public spaces for those social interactions. So I then applied these design principles to a case study in Burlington, Vermont. So why Vermont? Well, Vermont, as of right now, is the state ranked one of the highest ranked with the heavy prevalence of mental illnesses. Only a little more than half of those suffering with these mental illnesses are seeking treatment or even have access to professional treatment. Also, something to note is that the suicide rate in Vermont has been consistently higher than the national average and is right now about 35% higher. So Vermont serves as an opportunity for these design principles to be applied to this area in order to improve the well-being of those who live within the region. So the site is located in between downtown Burlington, where the University of Vermont is located, and then also between the northern neighborhoods. So there are plenty of recreational opportunities throughout all seasons throughout the year, including the summer and winter. There's also a recreational trail that goes all the way down towards downtown to connect all of these activities, both on land and water. The site is also in close proximity to the University of Vermont Medical Center. So as of right now, this medical center has an S.A.D clinic run by Dr. Kelly Rohan. So she is performing group behavioral therapy and providing other methods of treatment to those suffering with S.A.D in the area. The medical center also has access to a depression treatment center as well. So the site is located along North Avenue, which takes all of that traffic from the northern neighborhoods into downtown Burlington. There's also a bus stop located right outside of it to have direct access to the medical center. So the site is a little more than 23 acres. There are 2 to 3 story single-family dwellings located across the street. There's also an existing building on the property. This building was closed about 100 years ago. It was previously an orphanage and then was taken over by the city. It was just recently, over the summer, renovated by a local developer into an apartment building.
Excuse me, is that all one parcel currently?
So there's one parcel with the original building located within it, and then there's another L-shaped parcel beneath that. So the site also has a dramatic change in elevation. So going all the way from North Avenue to the lake is about a 100-foot difference in elevation. Most of that change is happening down towards the lake and where the recreational trail is, and then it's just a consistent slope throughout. So these aerials are demonstrating how this site looks during the summertime. There's plenty of wooded areas around it with that recreational trail down towards the lake. And these are demonstrating what a typical winter day in Vermont looks like. This trail is actually heavily used even during the winter time by residents throughout Burlington. So when looking into the master plan that I created, I took into consideration what the local developer was planning. So I kept the pure form of the original existing building and then placed multifamily residential dwellings along that axis of the building with a green open space between them. However, throughout the rest of this presentation, I'll be focusing on the other half of the site where most of my design occurs. So in terms of organization of this design, it is organized around a main axis that goes from Northern Avenue, going through the head therapy and research house, through the open green space, and then out towards the recreational trails at the bottom of the site. Then each community is organized along a cross axis with that open space, and then each community itself is organized a central courtyard. It's also important to keep in mind to connect the residents to nature, not just within the green spaces within their community, but also the surrounded woods throughout, as said previously as one of my design principles. Then it's also important to consider getting ample amount of sunlight into these central courtyard spaces as well. So with that, I would like to turn your attention to the boards so I can walk you through the length of the site. So starting down here, residents will have access to the site from North Avenue. And then cutting through the head therapy and education center at the top, this is a therapy center that not only is going to be accessed by the residents in that S.A.D. living community, but it will also be accessed by all the residents throughout Burlington. So not only will residents be able to have educational opportunities into additional treatment options, but it would also be connected to the University of Vermont Medical Center to allow professionals and researchers to come in to perform that group behavioral therapy for them. So this acts as a threshold into the remainder of the site. So next, I will be coming through one of the main communities. So these two communities up here towards the north are going to be for short-term living opportunities. So people can stay for a year or two, seek out treatment with close proximity to the therapy and education center, and then move on. These four, however, at the bottom will be for those interested in longer-term living in order to create those stronger communities within these co-housing living opportunities. So cutting through one of these communities, demonstrating how there's a central courtyard organized with the units on either side and a common house at the top. So allowing an ample amount of sunlight to reach into that courtyard. Then cutting through one of the common houses. So this is where all of that communal space is going to occur. So the kitchen and dining area, the indoor and outdoor living spaces, and then also storage opportunities. So residents can store some of their personal belongings, so that way their private living units are allowed to be smaller and more efficient to give more square footage to these communal spaces in the common house. Then cutting through the main open green space. So this green space is more flexible and is open to all 6 of the communities in order to provide larger areas for all of these communities to come together and interact. Then through that open green space, that recreational trail will connect down to the existing one down by the lake in order to encourage residents to be consistently active every day, getting their recreational opportunities all the way down towards Lake Champlain. So now I will redirect your attention to the slides to go through a typical layout of one of the communities. So as I said before, the common house is located along the street with units on the inside oriented on either side of the central courtyard space. So residents will have access to this community with parking right outside in order to encourage the residents to walk through the common house and have social interactions before continuing into their private units. Then to get into the common house, you have the ability to go in on either side. So on one side, you can enter straight into the kitchen, you can drop off groceries, you can see what's cooking for dinner. On the other side, you can enter into a smaller lobby space where you can grab your mail or greet a friend that's been waiting for you. Then the main central space within this common house is the dining room. So that is oriented onto the central courtyard space with views right out towards nature. There's also plenty of sunlight to come in with a fireplace on either side of the room to allow for additional light and warmth during the wintertime. In addition to the dining room, there is additional living space to the bottom side of the common house, both indoor and outdoor, to allow more light in, more social space, and then also views connecting out towards the lake and the woods. There's also a social space directly outside of the dining room to allow that dining space to bleed out towards a grilling area with direct access still to the kitchen. So all of these common spaces are located within this common house. However, the social interactive spaces bleed out into the courtyard space, ending with a picnic pavilion at the end of the community, with open loggias on either side for residents to walk under during inclement weather, such as rain or snow, on the way to their units. However, this loggia roof material would still be translucent in order to allow light to still come in. So again, relating back to the design principles, keeping in mind that these residents will be not only connected to nature within their central courtyard space, but also the open green space outside and the woods surrounding it. So there are 3 different unit types within this community. The first being loft units that are located at the top half of the courtyard. So those loft units take over the double height space. There's 6 of those. And then there's also 2 studio units and 4 one-bedroom unit types that are stacked on top of one another. So while these units share a lot of common characteristics, the one being the most important is that, again, relating to the idea of co-housing, having them being smaller, more efficient, and flexible to allow those common spaces within the common house to be larger. So their dining space and kitchen and living spaces within the unit are more tight-knit. There's also a connection not only to nature within the central courtyard off of the main entry of the unit, but there's also access onto the other side with these pedestrian-friendly alleyways between the two communities, with access for the lower units to walk out with additional vegetation, and then also balconies for the upper level units for additional light and air. So looking into the interior of these units, applying these design principles with these natural materials and textures, but also bringing ample amount of daylight in, particularly in the mornings, because those with S.A.D. Really struggle to get up in the mornings, particularly in the wintertime. So by allowing a lot of light to come into this dining nook with the windows on all three sides, views out to the courtyards, it really encourages the residents to get up, get their morning cup of coffee, and relax before the day begins. Similarly, in the evenings, each unit will have their own personal fireplace to provide additional light and warmth in the evening to come back to. So in summary, I just wanted to re-emphasize how these design principles are going to be implemented into these communities. So the first, again, being connecting to nature, not only within the courtyard, but surrounding it. Then using that central courtyard as a large public outdoor social space for interaction throughout both summer and winter, maximizing the amount of daylight in the summertime, having skylights bring in that high summer sun, and then in the winter, not only having snow bounce light off into the units, but also have fireplaces to provide additional light. Then keeping in mind the comfort of the resident within the unit, so in the summertime allowing for operable windows to allow air to circulate. And then in the wintertime, providing radiant heating in the floors, and then also those fireplaces for heat. And then finally, the implementation of natural materials throughout the units as seen before in some of the earlier perspectives. So in conclusion, this design of the co-housing community not only provides treatment and improves the mental and physical health of those with S.A.D., however, this can also serve as an example as to how architects can employ some of these design principles in order to improve the well-being of anyone and everyone, not just those suffering from S.A.D. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention and open up to questions and comments. So there's 18 units in each community, and there's 6 communities. So these 3 have loft units, so that might be for families, so that might be couples with children. The studio and 1-bedroom units might be for someone who's either living alone or for a couple.
What kind of transportation we are going to use?
Transportation?
Yes.
Yeah. So they're allowed to park their cars outside of the common house. There's also that bus stop that's located right outside the head house.
If I understand you correctly, the program of each of the community houses is the same.
Yes.
And the only difference between the top 2 units and the top 2 communities, the bottom 4, is the top 2 are short term,
Yes.
and the bottom 4 are longer term.
Correct.
Parking your site aside for a moment and just focusing on the building typology I'm going to talk about, why have you replicated this exact same diagram 6 times in a fairly formal manner? And what I'm getting at here is the solution, as I look at this, is a very formal kind of campus look.
Right.
And my understanding is that this is not it looks institutional. And this is not something that someone would be committed to, or like, this is not a patient thing. This is something that you would
Right.
volunteer. Like, I myself I suffer from SAD, or I want a more communal experience, therefore I now want to live in this community. And so I'm wondering if there's some underpinnings to your thesis that you haven't discussed yet that would lead to other financial reasons why you need this many units. Is there something that we're not getting that I would voluntarily want to be in here and live in this kind of institutional solution that you arrived at? Like, how does this compete with like a market-driven solution for the same dollar value?
Right. So you're asking, like, how I came to determine how many people are living within this community, or how they're organized?
Yeah, how is it organized? Why? Like, if your thesis is about co-living, which it is, why not?
If your thesis is about co-living, which it is, the value of your ideas seems to be much stronger in this than all of this.
Right.
And I actually want to know more about like why you felt compelled to show all of this, because it detracts from what I think are some of the more richer things that could be happening here, and could some of these interactions be exploded a little bit? If you had to say the entire scale, could these have been drawn out a bit more? Like you had that one diagram that showed like the desires, the programs, and then space needs. It showed this like kind of crazy, chaotic thing of like lines going across, and I'm thinking, oh, that's awesome. I'm suffering from S.A.D. I want all these varieties of things, but what you arrived at is a very staid, formal solution.
Can you put that diagram up? That was very.
Yeah, of course.
The lines of everything that you did.
That one.
Yeah, that's
Very interesting.
There's a lot of need there.
Please.
Yeah, so originally the idea was to focus in on one of these communities, but then when I came across this large, beautiful site, originally the focus was going to be only on a small portion of it, but then I decided to really take advantage of the whole site. And so then I kind of focus on designing one of these and then basically replicating them in order to provide a connection between more than just one of them. So I guess if it was a different site, I think I would have just focused on one in particular, but I think I just wanted to take advantage of the expansiveness of the site itself. And currently there's also a master plan to develop the whole entire site, and so originally I considered taking into consideration that master plan and only taking out, like designing a portion of their master plan. But in the end, I just decided to create this larger community so that way more of them can interact with one another.
I understand that. I think ultimately it probably hurts your thesis itself. That decision hurts the underlying thesis that you're
I see.
I'm done.
So Sarah, I'm looking at the site plan in the north arrow, and what I'm curious about is the solar orientation, the south orientation to the units. The units are symmetrical, right? And so there's some that favor the south side and some that favor vaguely the north side.
Right.
But there's also a spacing between the units that has to do with how much light is actually going to get into the south-facing units that aren't on the extreme right of the site plan. So I think those units on that forest side, on the right side of the site plan, are going to be great for south light. But the north-facing units and the units that are close to another unit, unless we kind of understand what that sectional relationship is, I'm curious as to how much south light is going to get into the units and help with the therapy that the project is supporting.
Right. Yeah, that's a great comment. Because originally when I was laying out the site plan, I did have it so everything was rotated 90 degrees, so all of these communities were equal. But then it got a little tricky with the way in which the streets and the alleys and everything was organized. So then I just had the streets coming directly through and then it turned everything 90 degrees the way it is now.
So, first of all, thank you for a very complete project.
Thank you.
You know, from the site plan to the buildings to the views. and the diagrams. It's nice to see something so complete. I had always thought seasonal affective disorder for me had to do with how Notre Dame did in the fall, but I guess it's a more serious problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have other issues. The thing that is, but piggybacking on
Good
Peter's
thing you're not
comments
rooting
here,
for the Terps.
the project to me looks a little bit like the kind of a big fan of UVA transplanted to Burlington.
Yes, that was a precedent.
And I think Peter's comments about the light, I've never been as cold as I was taking a walk along Lake Champlain in January once. I mean, it's the coldest I think I've ever experienced. And then, again, the summer's probably not so much better. But it makes me wonder a couple of things, like aside from the orientation issues and really understanding how sunlight gets into these rooms would be really significant. I find the center of the plan is a bit brittle there. You know, it's very, very, very formal.
Right.
And I wonder if a little bit of the informality of the lake edge could come up and affect that somewhat. I think that would help it.
Okay.
But also, I'm looking for things like, well, first of all, the one perspective I think is missing for me is the view standing in that space and looking out to the lake. I can see the aerial, but I want to know what's that like at ground level. I mean, Lake Champlain is a pretty significant thing.
Yes.
And the other thing too is that I'm looking for sort of programming things that work throughout the year. So for example, if this is something designed to make people, you know, feel better when the sun is low and it's cold and stuff, shouldn't there be like an outdoor fire pit or some communal things like that? Cross-country trails, stuff that, do you have those sorts of things there?
I did, in one iteration I did have that.
It just strikes me that those sort of things that people know that they can be outside all year round would be really kind of important. And the last comment is, you know, and it's not so much something you see in Vermont, but you do see it in Maine, where you see these houses that are attached to the barns with these little walkways because it's just too darn cold to go outside in the winter. And I'm wondering, was there ever a solution where people didn't have to go outside to get to the so-called the big house at the end there, and so they didn't have to get all dressed up and put their coats on?
Yeah.
In months of the year, which I presume is at least 3, maybe more, significantly cold.
Yeah, so that actually was a design consideration, and I iterated with that. So originally I did have it directly connect to the common house all interior. However, I decided to go against that mostly because we're discussing with some of the mental health professionals talking about S.A.D. I think the point was to also encourage those with S.A.D. to go outside, and I think if they never had if they were never had the option to go outside, then they just wouldn't. So if, for example, if they wanted to go get a meal at the common house and they never had to go outside, then I don't think they ever
Would it
would.
be possible to have some of the houses that were attached to the, I mean, there seems to be a kind of very sameness about every houses, and it makes me wonder, well, maybe some of them could be attached to people who didn't have that kind of a problem. And
It could be.
people who were further away could be a little bit more detached because they knew that it wasn't a problem for them to go outside to get to the communal place. It just strikes me that treating all of them the same, I suspect those kind of little nuances and choice in those nuances would be important for people to feel they were living somewhere that was more customized to at least some aspect of what their issues were.
Yeah.
Is this existing site wooded?
Yes. Well, it was until recently a local developer decided to basically wipe out all of these trees.
You had a
You're
slide.
going by that premise.
Yes, but then I put all the
Can you go to
woods
that
back.
slide with the aerial photo?
Yes.
And maybe it had the shape of this, yeah,
This one?
yeah. Go, look at the shape of the site for a minute. That one. Okay, keep that up.
So it seems, I think you're hearing everybody's, people are struggling with the formality of the
Right.
site and the repetition. I completely agree with Peter's comment about the sun. And I'm begging the question to, now that you have this really formal thing, overlay it, yes, with sun, rotate things, but also it strikes me that this part of the country is extremely outdoor oriented. You said it yourself, people are outdoors all the time, they're active. They're in nature trails, they're biking, they're hiking, they're skiing. None of those things are particularly straight paths. And I think this begs to have natural paths across the whole site, potentially that follows what the natural gentle slope of the site is doing. That could really layer onto this. It could mix up the formality and add a different layer to it that sort of keeps it but plays with it in a way that allows variation. And each one of these, they're only different, and you felt the need to put a different color in each one to identify them. And that kind of points out, the issue with their similarity. And each one of them, in a way, if there's going to be 6, should have an identity of its own. Right. And it doesn't, I don't think, have to do with the color of them or a material.
No, absolutely.
I think it has more to do with activities that happen in each one or how they sit in the landscape.
Yeah, you should take a look at some of Charles Goodman's houses in the local communities around here. I don't know if you looked at any of that, but there's a lot of topography change, and the houses a lot of them are very similar. The same model is repeated, but they're turned and oriented on the site in different ways depending on, and you have a lot of topography over here.
Yeah.
When you take a look at that site model, it almost looks like if some of the houses were almost stood up a little bit, they start to get these views out over top of each other. And you start to get some spaces that are, a little bit more intimate, kind of like what you've made, but then I think it would address exactly what Peter and Monica are asking about. So you've tackled sort of the space making on the interior units, and thank you for showing everything that you've shown. I love the aspect of this sort of fireplace hearth that's inserted in each of these. I suspect that sort of wanting warmth is not something that you mentioned, but I could see that being something that would help with this particular disorder. So all of that hard work should really be, you should be really proud of that.
Thank you.
You want to, you can. Thanks. First of all, I've just been here briefly, but I want to compliment all of you on your poise. You guys are incredibly good verbal presenters for that.
It's been the first time I saw this, I thought it was a TED Talk.
Yeah, you guys are awesome.
Mic'd up and
really awesome. So, really the best I've seen. It's really, you guys are really, really good. So I'm going to repeat a few things that people have said, which is about the kind of rigidity of the plan, because you seem quite afraid of this point right here, because this is where your plan ends, right? So what happened to that big triangle at the bottom, which is actually the best part of the site, close to the lake?
Yes. So
It's too cold.
I was a little worried. This part of the site is really steep.
It is,
so that
I saw that.
was a challenge in itself. Yeah, but an opportunity as well. Yeah.
So I think it'd be interesting to take the modules you have, and I'm mostly convinced by the sort of individual 6 communities, but I think that you could pull them apart, you could rotate them, you could do things that would make the whole thing a little more interesting.
And less institutional.
Right. And more, working with the topography, which I think, when you look at that section, which I think is great, this long section, when you realize that those courtyards are all at different levels, I think that's really good, and there's more variety there than it looks. My one big critique, though, of 2 things. One is you have a huge site and you're not using almost most of it. So, that whole back, the triangle, and also the part at the street is really not used. And maybe you need more program. I don't know, maybe you need to do more of these things.
Yeah. I was a little concerned just because the community right now is looking to heavily, densely populate that with a bunch of multifamily residential buildings.
You're talking about on North Avenue.
Well, this whole site they're going to develop.
So you could...
Because mine is very low density. So
right, but you could have populated North Avenue with a whole lot of multifamily buildings just like you want, right? It's kind of lost. The other thing that you touched on, but I'm going to question you about, is this is very, very car-centric, actually. You know, cars can drive through this whole thing, and I understand why. I mean, you need to be able to get to the units, but that central space, which I agree with it's kind of undercooked given how important it is. And it's got a lot of cars in it, actually.
Right.
So I wonder about that decision, about whether the cars should have been on the edge of the site instead of in the middle.
So I iterated several times. I struggled with the parking driving the site throughout this entire process.
Sure.
Just because the car is important. And originally there was one iteration where I had the cars over on this side, sheltered by canopies, but then I was a little worried about residents going straight into their unit without ever going through the common house or deciding just to hide out in their unit. So there was it was challenging to figure out where to put that
I thought for a second, and I think it'd be worth thinking about if this is actually backwards. If maybe the common house should be on the edge and these courtyards should all be open to that center space instead. Which would then let you drive along the edge and not have cars in it.
Yeah, that was another iteration.
The other thing that I would challenge you with, and it's a little bit more of a big problem, is the weakest part of your project is right there where those pedestrian paths start to head to the lake.
This part?
Like, what's that about? Why is that so minor? And why can't I see the lake in that plan?
Well, I guess originally I wanted to connect to the existing trail at the bottom, and then I also contemplating whether or not to put infrastructure here. So originally I wanted to put an indoor recreation center to kind of end that axis. But then...
I think open is fine, but I also... You know, we saw this, at least I saw this in the other two projects. You're a little cautious about nature, right? I mean, wouldn't you clear those trees out to look at the lake, really? Probably?
Mm-hmm.
I was a model for it.
Unleash your...
But she does have the lake shown in that site plan.
Unleash your inner Dan Snyder. That's great.
Can I
all right, I'll shut
jump in
up.
on the back of that? Because I think that's a good segue.
Dan Snyder.
I actually think, I'm kind of questioning, I think it's a great presentation to start off with, Sarah. It's really, professional passes are fantastic. You know, you're going to have a great career, and it's really clear that you're very thorough about your thought about stuff. I'm troubled by campus for the fact that it does tend to project a kind of institutional aspect that Marcus touched on at the very beginning. I'm troubled by campus. That's like my bread and butter, right? So, let me work through this for a second. The first thing that came to mind when I looked at this is in the 19th century, a lot of campuses were designed so that if they failed as an educational institution, they could be repurposed as mental institutions. Gotcha. And Vassar comes to mind as an example. If you think of Vassar College, it's one big building, mega building, and the idea basically was, well, if it doesn't work as a school for women, we're going to make sure it works as a mental institution. It does tell you a lot about the mindset, and if you actually read literature from that period of time, they refer to people that are going to school in some of the literature refers to people that go to school on campuses as inmates, as in the same sense as inmates in a mental institution. I wonder why. I mean, I love Vermont. I've spent a lot of time in Vermont, a little bit further south up here, places like Dorset, Manchester, and whatnot. And I wonder why the small Vermont hamlet did not become a model for this and why it was the college campus. Because the idea of a hamlet would be that it would be mainstreaming a pattern of living that exists within the state. It kind of masks it. It's like I'm not going to the home or this special place. I'm actually going to a nice little town where everything is kind of worked out for me. But if Hamlet was entirely out of the question, then how about Macbeth? No. If Hamlet was entirely out of the question and campus absolutely was an imperative, then I would have selected a different attitude towards landscape. So I think about the palette, classic and romantic, which are two great long traditions within American college planning tradition. And I would probably then embrace something that was a more romantic model, meaning that the landscape would be more fluid, the building placement would be more picturesque, it would be more forgiving to the site, and it would be actually potentially something that would have allowed I don't know that in the romantic model you wouldn't need to cut through those trees. In this model you have to cut through the trees. But there may be, like in Vermont and New York, or around Lake Champlain, there may be a lot of prohibitions that don't let you even come close to the water's edge anymore. So that would make it, the romantic model here, I think, would become more forgiving. It would work with contour. You'd have to move less dirt, or you'd move dirt in a way that it would make it seem like it had always been that way, as opposed to something that's more mechanical. So one is I advocate for Hamlet. And then if not Hamlet, if campus, then I advocate for the romantic response. But great job.
Thank you.
Sarah, just a couple other references. Matt mentioned Charles Moore's Sea Ranch, which has a very enclosed courtyard, but another reference closer to your site is the Haystack Mountain School, which steps down to waterside and is a very sided condition.
Okay.
There's an uphill and a downhill orientation.
Sea Ranch has the beauty of both a communal courtyard space, but the myth of individuality on the edge. Because you're in I know Beauville's not here, so it has both things. Be part of it if you want to, or you can be an individual. In any event, but something like that. I mean, I think Brian mentioned the Hamlet. It's the sort of thing. If this was a month or 6 weeks ago, and I was giving you credit, I think what I would say to you is, okay, you've solved it. You've solved it, now design it. So in other words, you've gotten to a point where there's a solution that works. We know it works, right? But then you go back and say, now that I brought this to completion with all the views and everything, what are the design things that I need to explore? And I think there's and I don't know, I was on your committee, so I don't really know the lesson or what you did or didn't do. But it just strikes me, in its completeness, is impressive. But what people were bringing up is I think, an interesting thought about, well, once you get to this very high level of resolution, you can go back and take it apart and put it back together very quickly, benefiting from the knowledge you have of having solved it so completely the first time. I think if you worked on this for another month, and we're not going to make you do that, but so relax, but you would come up with, I think, things very quickly that would allow you to assimilate a lot of the criticism that you've heard today, because the solution's been so thorough. You can make a village, you can make a picturesque, you can make something based on seaside or sea ranch. And all those things would form critiques of this particular scheme.
So why is she just saying that?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, I think it's a good question. I mean, in a way, it's almost like you want to try and get to a larger gestalt of the project earlier, so you can really get into just the design of the thing, because I think there is, and this is a lesson for all the thesis students, it's sort of like you want to be able to see this level of A to Z and all the scales in between earlier on, so you can do the sort of design investigations that benefit from the knowledge you have built into this.
The beauty of what Matt said was that you design the ideal, you have that as the kit of parts, and then you can do the urban design. It's not linear. It's not as if you have to do the urban design first, and I can't ever get to the units. So that's very important that we make that very clear for units, and the work over here on the right side is absolutely spot on. And then it may be some of the rigidity, the institutional aspect, which is in Sarah's DNA. You might want to add exactly. It's manifesting itself.
Yeah, I just want to elaborate on this just a little bit. You have a list of what you need to do to tackle this SAD.
Right.
Syndrome. Yeah. So you know that the units have to have a lot of light. So you take one of your units that you designed and you just analyze it. Do I really have enough light there? When they wake up in the morning, do they have the bedroom on the east, they get the light. In the afternoon, they are in the living room, they have the west, they have the light. Then you have the roof here, so am I allowing light from above when the sun is in a certain angle? So you can maximize the light in the unit. And then you have another something that you wrote there, that they have to be outdoor. So you ask yourself, how do I make them, force them to go outdoor? So you can have a unit that have a court in the middle of the house, and they have to move from the living room to the bedroom, they have to go outside. You don't have a client now, you see, so you can just stretch it and do it. I mean, some people do it in other countries, and here I know with the air conditioning and all the, but you can do things like this. That's the thing, you have to go to your list and just see, am I getting that? And if not enough, so how do I make it? And you stretch it, and it's true, you go from the little one to the big one, the big development, from the big development to the little, but you work them together.
Thank you.
I'd love to see you, now that you have this model made, take some photographs of it and then tear it apart and really try to come up with sort of 5 different ways that you could use those same buildings, use all of the site, allow yourself to sort of stretch down to the water, and then rearrange it in many different ways, take different photographs and add that to your portfolio. Because I think that it would show sort of, okay, this is what I got to. And then from there I was able to take these units and I was able to rearrange them in 5 different ways that represent the romantic, that represent this, that represent. So I think that would be a really valuable just tool for your portfolio to show how you sort of push through to the next level.
Yeah, thank you.
But for me, I still think it's unfortunate that we're talking about those things at this point in your process, because I see some of those styrofoam models, and I think they're styrofoam. That's when some of this should have been done. I mean, this is the typology is that you have this sort of duplex. I don't know if you decided that early on, and you look at the soil orientation. If the fact is that they really need sunlight, then this site plan should have an orientation that works with the solar orientation, but it's not. Is there a reason why? Is it just because you're perpendicular to North Avenue? I mean, you have such a great distance here that shouldn't be the issue. When I look at the topography, I'm looking at that, your big section where it says connection to nature. Maybe your building should have been excavated out of that, and you have the views out. And then put all of that spec office, whatever it is, the development along North Avenue. Somehow you come through and you come to this area where in that topo, in your topo right there, you can see where it drops quickly. You can sort of nestle the building in there. So it doesn't have to look like stereotypical village. It could be something that's more organic, using the topography and organic to the soil orientation. So I don't think it's a matter of taking these now and sort of moving them around like that. So you're done with this, but from now on, factor those things in early on, and have lots of parties in relationship to that with those study models, and then develop the architecture.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
All right. That's the sign.
Thank you. Well, Sara, I think that you are bringing at least 3 great things into your career. And one is your highly ethical attitude that architecture is a way that you are going to make the world a better place for people. And that came through all the way through this thesis, that it was all about increasing well-being. And you took on a very particular condition. You took on an unfamiliar place, and you delved deeply. So you brought a research mentality. You looked at the science. When you met people who were involved in this place, in this particular healing endeavor, you looked at architecture and architectural research, and you looked at other cultures. You know, how did the northern Scandinavian countries deal with these same conditions that you're finding in Vermont? So that ethical stance, that research orientation, and your kind of boundless enthusiasm for doing the work. And I would say also boundless interest. You came to every one of our meetings with piles of drawings and multiple iterations. These are just like the tip of the iceberg of the model investigations and the drawings. And every one of those items was your way of working through the sometimes contradictory ideas that you were talking about with me and your thesis chair of the year, Professor Dupuy. And so you were always willing to test it out, to argue it through. And the project, I think, you picked big sites so that your project all of a sudden became much bigger than what you had set out to do. And I think you've got some fantastic criticism this afternoon, and it's coming at a great time in your career because I think you're absolutely well positioned to go into practice, and I think this has opened up a whole bunch of different ways of looking at this site. I think that you were looking at it as a cultural landscape that was essentially dictated by the orphanage and the formality of that building. And I think that the very formal scheme that you presented to us derived from a respect for that institution. Yeah. And I think that the wonderful critique this afternoon just opens up many new ways of looking at the place. And I think that's a great way to begin your career with that. Taking your enthusiasm for grappling with architectural questions and thinking about how you can break it open, take some more risks, try a whole bunch of new ways, and I can't imagine anyone better prepared to do that. So thanks for a great week together.
On the other side of the wall, I believe we might need to take some of the chairs that have the guards are on the other side.
Yeah, one of our angles is like